What's going on, guys? Another SIGcast here. This one, we're going into more unification and nationalistic movements. And as you can see on this map here, this time we're going to learn about one of the most interesting nationalist movements and unification movements, and that would be one in Germany, where Prussia becomes modern Germany. So really, this didn't come out of nowhere. This had been something that the Germans had been contemplating for a while. I'd mentioned synthesis-wise, even as far back as the 30 Years' War, with all of the foreign intervention, there was a lot of feeling in Germany that if foreign powers would just get out and leave them alone, that they could do great things. And in the mid-19th century, with nationalism on the rise following the age of Napoleon, Germans also attempted to unify common German states. The one thing I want you to write down here, and anytime you see a slide, by the way, with this template, pause, go ahead and take the notes in your own words, then listen and add to your core notes. All the other slides, I don't want you to ignore them because I'm filling in a lot of spaces. Definitely fill out information as needed on the Cornell notes. You just don't have to, take them directly in word for word. So anyway, I'm going to try to tell this story the best that I can. But back to this unification process, there was something called the Zollverein. All right, and you can see it spelled there on the slide. In Prussia in the 1830s, what this was their attempt to establish an economic union, kind of like an EU, but one for just German states. And there were 17 German states inside this German confederation known as the Zollverein, and they eliminated internal tariffs and basically set the tone for a greater union. But really the goal was economic. It was to promote free trade internally and keep imports at a minimum, to try to drive in Germany towards industrialization and really modernization. Ironically, Austria did not join. Metternich was against it, and we start to see the tension mount between Austria and Prussia. So this really was one of the biggest sources of tension between Austria and Prussia. And eventually Austria will try unsuccessfully to destroy the Zollverein. But like I said, this is really important because it leads Prussia and eventually Germany to become very, very industrialized, modernized, with a better economy than Austria. The next is something that we've already kind of dabbled with, and that was the Frankfurt Parliament, or the Frankfurt Assembly. And this is where the German states were inspired by the revolutions of France in 1848. Liberals demanded a constitutional government and union, or a federation of German states. And Frederick William IV rejected the liberal constitution and really imposed a conservative one that guaranteed royal control of the government. And that, in fact, will be the government that lasts until 1918. When Germany is defeated in the First World War. Germany, however, was a bit more divided than Italians in this process. Most Germans in the north were Protestants, while the southern Germans tended to be Catholic. There was also something that I want you to know, the German question. And in the 19th century, the big question is, would there be a Großdeutsch, or a big Germany, where there was this massive German state, including Prussia and Austria, or would it be Kleindeutsch, where one of these states would kind of assume responsibility for the formation of a German nation? And obviously Kleindeutsch will win out the day. And that's what this presentation is kind of about, that story and how it happened. And by 1815, the leaders of the German states had already attempted to unify with a constitutional monarchy, as I said, at the Frankfurt Parliament, but there were disagreements. Those disagreements between the northern and southern Germans at the Frankfurt Assembly, what ended up happening is the leader of Prussia, Frederick William IV, dismissed the offer that they gave him as being the monarch of a constitutional monarchy as an offer from an emperor of dirt. Okay, so he famously said, basically he claimed the divine right of kings, and that he basically said that in accepting a crown from a representative body was like accepting a crown of dirt, or a crown from the gutter. And that's basically where the Frankfurt Parliament, or the Frankfurt Assembly, will fail. And really you see both Prussia and Austria kind of failing to support the unification movement at this point in time. So the Frankfurt Assembly will eventually disassemble, I should say, and collapse. Next, we talk about something called the humiliation of Olmütz. The Austrians, when the Frankfurt Assembly and that unification process fell through, threatened war against the Prussians if they didn't abandon their plans to unify Germany. And so in November of 1850, Prussian ministers signed an agreement with Austrian counterparts in the Moravian city of Olmütz. And this becomes known as the humiliation of Olmütz due to the fact that Prussia was basically forced to accept Austrian dominance or go to war. Now, the story doesn't end there. Prussia will continue to seek, and they will get revenge for their humiliation of Olmütz. And we'll talk about the North German Confederation of 1866 and how that came about. But this is a good map depicting of this. 22 German states start to unify politically and economically. Notice Austria, not one of them. So at the end of 1848, 1850, it became clear that in the future there would be only two states that could possibly lead the country into unification. And so thus begins the showdown between Prussia and Austria. And during this time, Germany, with the Zollverein, moved into the Industrial Revolution. I think that this is very, very important. The Zollverein paves the way for this massive industrial growth in the 1850s. And the fact that Austria was left out really does start to bring in attention to this situation. German quality and engineering brought wealth to the various states in the Zollverein, and the need for unity became even more important as railroads and massive public infrastructures were needed to be built to accommodate the large growth of manufacturers and industries. Austria tried to even convince and persuade some of the southern states in the Zollverein to leave, but to no avail. Austria found itself on the outside looking in. Nationalism within, the German rising middle class that brought on by industrialization brought about dreams of a unified Germany, one without Austria. So again, this is just a slide reinforcing some of the things that I have just told you. If you want to jot some of these down in your Cornell notes, that's fine. If not, just make sure you remember them and understand the story, and you'll be okay. So that German industrialization occurred rapidly over the course of the next 10 years, 12 years, and by 1860, the quest for unity continued. Many began looking in the Zollverein to Prussia to be the leader of this unification process. So what were they to do? Well, a lot of stuff happened and changed after the revolutions of 1848 had failed. Italy began seeking, as we learned, and gradually obtained unification. That had a profound impact on Germany. Hey, if, Italy can do that at the expense of Austria, maybe we could too. So people start realizing that Austria kind of lost its edge, and the time could be near for the unification of Germany. Another transformation that took place was King William I took over for Frederick William IV and immediately began making sweeping military reforms. He wanted to double the size of the military by making universal male conscription and reduce the importance of the militia, which was created during the Napoleonic Wars. To pay for this, he needed to increase the budget and really raise taxes. And this creates a power struggle with the parliament that had emerged in the wake of the Frankfurt Assembly. It was run by liberals, many of them who wanted less military and more power taken away from the king. And in 1862, they rejected the military budget, and many conservatives were defeated in parliamentary elections. So King William considered abdication. But he decided to bring in reinforcements, and it was a good thing that he did for himself. The reinforcement that he brought in was none other than Otto von Bismarck. And in 1862, he was appointed the new chief minister to King William I, or Wilhelm I. Bismarck is really one of the great names in European history. He's one of my favorite people to study. He was born a Junker in 1815 in the year of the Congress of Vienna in the Brandenburg state of East Elba. But he was a brilliant leader, and really some people call him the greatest German historical figure between Luther and Hitler. Early on, in his complex mind, he had a far-reaching goal to lead Germany into unification. Bismarck was charming, heartless, ruthless, and cunning. Even the king was kind of afraid of him. He was a hero to some and a villain to others. He was a very big ego, he was power-hungry, and he entered the civil service, which was the only other aristocratic choice other than military service in Prussia. He initially hated the political game, And originally he quit and went back home. His quote is, "My pride bids me to command, not obey." He didn't like playing nice with other people and making compromises that you kind of have to do politically. But he went back into politics and put Prussia on a collision course which would create modern Germany. And his theory was that liberalism would get in the way of the opportunity for Germany to become great. But liberalism wasn't going anywhere, so he had to find a way to manipulate and get around it. Bismarck had very many valuable beliefs by which to lead. And he had some, pretty good quotes. The enemy of today might be the friend of tomorrow. Isolate your enemies. He'll do that. Take advantage of the opportunities as they arise. Always keep your options open. Be practical and opportunistic. One must always have two irons in the fire. And if you think about it, as you see the story kind of transpire here, he practiced what he preached. A lot of these beliefs will kind of be the backbone of the new style of leadership that emerges during here. And you can throw Napoleon III and Count Cavour in the mix here. And it's really the age of realpolitik. And, it's not really passionate. It's not religious in terms of, follow one set rule of guidelines. It's actually, use the conservative/liberal/nationalistic forces that were alive and well during the 19th century and use them to your advantage. So he also had a couple other ones. He said the less people know about how sausages and laws are made, the better they'll sleep at night, which that's pretty darn true. Never believe anything until it has been officially denied. A generation that has taken a beating is always followed by a generation that deals one. And he used that with some of the things that were going on in German history. Some damn foolish thing in the Balkans will provoke the next war. And boy, was he right with World War I. So the next thing I want you to maybe make a note of in your Cornell notes when we're talking about realpolitik, Bismarck had a gap theory. And the king wanted to raise and increase spending in the army to make his power internally and externally more powerful. There was an army bill crisis, and it was a stalemate between the king and the liberal legislature over the reforms of the army. This kind of reminds me of some of the things that were going on in Poland when we talked about the emergence of absolutism and centralization, where the Liberum Veto in the Sejm prevented Poland from making necessary reforms to allow Poland to really be relevant in the future of European statehood. So Bismarck insisted that there was a gap in the Prussian constitution that didn't mention what was to be done if a stalemate developed. If there's nothing there, then you can handle it and find clever ways to manipulate the situation. And he said since the king had granted the Constitution, Bismarck insisted just ignore the liberals, ignore the middle class in the legislature, and do what you think is right. That was his gap theory. And he gives a famous speech where he outlines Prussia's power. And he states that Prussia must be prepared to seize opportunities as they present themselves for growth. He wasn't well received when he made this speech. People called his policy might makes right, but really he could have cared less. And, he says the great questions of the day will not be decided by speeches and resolutions. That was the great era of 1848 and 1849. The great questions of the day will be answered but by blood and iron. And what he basically does is he illegally begins having the bureaucracy collect the taxes of the people. And the opposition responded by voting more liberals to Parliament. But in the meantime, he collects the taxes anyway, and the plotting begins. Take out your opposition, isolate them one by one. The first example of this is the Prussian-Danish War of 1863. The Danes had decided to annex Schleswig and Holstein, even though there were large German populations there. This was a direct challenge to the German Confederation. Bismarck got Austria to join in his nationalistic struggle against the Danes. So this is the first war, the Danish War. Bismarck gets Austria to join him in seizing the provinces of northern Germany, the Northern German Confederation of Schleswig and Holstein, from Denmark. The spoils are split. The Prussians and Austrians overwhelm the Danes, and Prussia has Schleswig, Austria has Holstein. I'll pick up here in the next episode and we'll finish the Danish War. Thank you.